Well, good evening. My name is Meredith McQuaid. I'm the Associate Vice President and Dean for International Programs for the University of Minnesota System. I'm delighted to have the China Center as part of our collection of international units that do great work across the state and across the world. We're really happy to welcome you to this China Center sponsored event, which is part of a series of webinars designed to bring people together around important topics related to China and the United States and our long and complicated history. So tonight's topic is not only particularly timely with the 2020 election only days away, but it is a really important reminder that groups of people who share perhaps a single attribute or individuals who followed a similar path to citizenship in our country do not necessarily share opinions about topics of either insignificant or even monumental importance. The film First Vote is an award-winning documentary that takes a hard look at Asian American passions on both sides of the political divide in election battleground states, Ohio and North Carolina in both 2016 and 2018. If you haven't seen it, you really have to watch it. We are so delighted to have with us tonight the director of the film and two of the informed and well-thought, well-spoken participants in it. And Joan Brzezinski will introduce them to you in just a moment. But I want to thank the panelists for your time, for your insight and your commitment to a free and well-informed democracy, and for all of the care you took to tell the story of your own passion for understanding history and for participating in shaping our future. And thanks to all of us who have joined this evening. I know we are going to have a lot of fun and we'll learn a lot. And now I'll turn it over to Joan Brzezinski.
Thank you, Meredith. It's our great pleasure to be here, and we'd like to congratulate Director Yi Chen on her film. It's a very interesting documentary, and I'm very pleased that we have this opportunity to share it and discuss it this evening. It's going to be a really, I think, lively discussion, and hopefully we can learn something. Yi Chen is an independent filmmaker who's based in Washington, D.C. She's a Soros Equality Fellow and D.C. Arts and Humanities Fellow. Her debut feature, First Vote, is an official selection at the 2020 AFI Docs Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival. She's First Vote Initiative is currently on campus and a community tour across the U.S. through the Good Docs website and film support. And it's Good Talk Speaker Series. E holds an MFA in Film and Media Arts from American University, and her work is exploring the intersection of immigration, democracy, racial justice through the lens of Asian American experiences. Kaiser Guo is the host of Sinica Podcast, which is a weekly current affairs podcast that has run since 2010. He spent a good deal of time in China, where he played in a heavy metal band called Tang Dynasty. And he also went on to have a career in journalism before joining China's leading search engine, Baidu. So he serves as Director of International Communications there and returned to the United States in 2016. And we were very pleased to welcome him to the University of Minnesota as our Bob and Kim Griffin Building U.S.-China Bridges lecture speaker. I believe it was, just seems like last year, 2018 series. So welcome back, Kaiser. And Dr. Jennifer Ho is the Director of Center for Humanities and Arts at the University of Colorado Boulder, where she's also holds the appointment of professor in Ethnic Studies Department. She's also the president of Association for Asian American Studies and author of 3 scholarly monographs, including Racial Ambiguity in Asian American Culture, which won the South Atlantic Modern Language Association Award for Best Monograph. In addition to her academic work, she's very active in the community engagement and around the issues of race and intersectionality, leading workshops on anti-racism and how to talk about race in our current political climate. So welcome, everybody. Our format tonight, or tonight, I guess, we are going to start with some questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for questions. And we've already had some audience members send in their questions in advance. If you're interested in asking a question, please use our Q&A function, which is where we're going to look for those questions. The chat function is just messages to the panelists. If you wish to use that, you may do that. But please send your questions to the Q&A function. Okay, so we'll start off with a couple of questions for E, because this is your film. So how did you locate your subjects? And how well do you feel these four people represent the political views of the Chinese American community in the US? Hyen, can you unmute her? There we go.
Yes. Thank you so much for hosting this panel. Yeah, so I made the film because actually I came to the US in 2003 and I became a citizen last year. So 2020 is actually my first time voting. At the time back in 2016, 2017, when I started the project, I was interested in exploring Asian American voters' growing participation in the democratic process from both sides, particularly first-time voters. So initially, the film was going to be, my personal journey going to battleground states before my first vote to meet voters in my own community and ask them why they voted for Trump and why they voted for Hillary. And the film has evolved into a character-driven film following these four Chinese American voters for almost 2 years in 2017 throughout till the 2018 midterms.
Okay. So what did you find most challenging about filming this over this long period of time, or the 2 years? I don't know. Maybe that's a very short period of time for a film, but what did you find most surprising? What challenged you most?
What challenged me most? It was, well, there are lots of challenges. I would say the first year was probably the most challenging, and getting access. So finding the characters, it took me 5 to 6 months to find the characters, and getting access was challenging too, because there are scenes in the movie that characters went to political conventions, particularly GOP conventions in Ohio was hard to get access to. I got media credential for from the GOP convention in North Carolina, but I didn't actually get a media credential in Ohio. So I had to go in with a small camera, a consumer small digital camera to film, and yeah, so yeah, I would say getting access is probably the most challenging part.
Okay, question for Kaiser and Jennifer. What messages are missed when the Democratic or the Republican Party are campaigning? And why do you think a portion of the Chinese American or Asian American voters are supporting the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party? What are your observations? Maybe Kaiser, do you want to start?
Okay,
Yeah.
I guess. I think what's missed, I think there's not a realization of political realities in China. I think that one thing that I've taken away after talking to just all sorts of people who have family members who are Trump supporters or who are themselves Trump supporters. First of all, they're all focused in a particular sort of age group and a sort of period of when they emigrated from China and came to the United States. I think that, and if you look at the China that they left, I think it says a lot about why they voted for Trump. I think that a lot of them have really been imprinted by the kind of brutal, amoral, hyper-competitive environment of China of the 90s and the 2000s, of the reform and opening period, when things were really accelerating, when it was sort of a I'm going to screw you before you screw me, me and mine before you and yours. And that kind of a person, and of course, they come here often with the intention of educating their children in the United States, and anything that gets in the way of that, they're going to find objectionable. And that's why we see so many of them lined up against affirmative action, and how affirmative action is such a mobilizing issue for so many of them. So I think that's something that people in both parties probably don't recognize. I think the GOP is probably more aware of what an important issue that is for Asian, or for certain kinds of Asian American voters. So that's what I would identify primarily. Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with Kaiser, and I definitely think, because Kaiser, you're on WeChat, and so you may see things, right, that are coming through in that way. So I just got asked this question actually by a reporter who's doing a piece about Asian Americans that are voting for Trump. And I will say that based on the things that Lance and Sue shared, as well as sort of just my general knowledge of Asian Americans and Asian immigrants, I guess the first thing is that Asian American voters are still overwhelmingly voting Democrat. Now, it's not, we don't have the stats yet, but if you look at, and I can put in the chat a link to API data, which is run by Karthik Ramakrishnan. What's interesting is that both immigrant-born and US-born Asian Americans still vote Democrat. So I think part of this is, there's a way in which the media is really interested in promoting these stories about Asian Americans who are voting for Trump. And I think that Asian Americans, like every other variety of American, run the kind of electoral gamut in terms of politics. And so, yes, there are definitely conservative Asian Americans, but whether we can actually point to anything definitive about why, that's a little bit harder. I think that recent immigrants are more likely to be conservative than US born, but that's not always the case. And I think that especially if you are coming from a communist nation, right? So if you're thinking about immigrants from Vietnam, immigrants from China, who had particular experiences in their country, right? In their communist country, and therefore have very strong feelings about communism. And so if you have very strong negative feelings about communism and you come to the United States, the party that appears to be most vehemently anti-communist is the Republican Party. And I think there's also a kind of bootstraps mentality. And I think there's a way in which that kind of rhetoric could be seductive and align with someone's already conservative values, and thus have them, voting for the GOP. And then I also think, the question I got asked today was, is it connected also to evangelicalism? And I really don't understand the connections of the evangelical Christian right and why they support Donald Trump. I think there are probably other people in the audience who can better kind of explain why that is. It seems like it's a transactional relationship in which they are tolerating a lot of the things that would seem antithetical to a Christian right evangelical value system, in supporting somebody who is 3 times married, who is a noted womanizer, who's been accused of sexual assault and sexual harassment, who's cheated on multiple wives. This hardly seems the paragon of Christian values, but he just successfully made the Supreme Court, solidly right-leaning. And so that may be part of the reason why they're supporting him.
Right. I think that with the communism question, it's more pronounced in the case of Vietnamese, probably. With Chinese immigrants, I think that a lot of them, for a lot of them, it's a pose, that it's something they know will resonate and will win them the affections and approval of the GOP, that they're interested in flattering, and it's really unfortunate. I've seen this with a lot of them, and they drift toward this sort of cartoonish version of China that they know in their hearts does not reflect the reality of the country that they actually left, and that's I think just downright shameful. Joan, you're muted. Joan, you're muted right now. Can somebody unmute Joan, please? There you
I'm
go.
sorry. Could you talk a little bit more about maybe the status of Asian American community regarding the current tensions of COVID-19 and the tensions between the US and China? Do you think either party is reaching out to Asian Americans to say, you know, they've got their back, or they have policies that will benefit them and help solve some of these issues?
Jennifer? You're muted.
It was a mute problem tonight.
Okay, sorry. I can't do two things at once. So I was trying to, because I want to really give a shout out. There are 3 really prominent Asian American scholars who are in attendance, who are University of Minnesota faculty, and Josephine Lee is a former professor or president of the Association for Asian American Studies. And so I also want to kind of say, anything I get wrong or anything you want to add to that they should. So sorry, Joan, can you just sort of repeat the question? Because I was.
Well, it was just given the current situation with COVID-19, the tensions between the US and China, do you think either one of the parties is sort of reaching out to the Asian community, raising their status within the party to sort of draw them in?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the Democrats have been doing this for quite a while. I mean, beginning with Barack Obama. And I think especially because Barack Obama is an interesting case in this, because his sister is Asian American identified, is married to Conrad Ng, who is Asian Canadian identified. And so especially Conrad has been, front and center in various Asian American kind of activities. And then I will say, I think that Asian Americans have been much more politically active over the last 2 decades, and and I think both parties are recognizing the ways in which Asian American voters can become swing voters, right? Can really kind of influence an election. And, again, I'll remember to put in the chat the link to APIA data. But I don't, because I'm not a Democrat, I don't know how much the Democrats are reaching out to Asian American voters. My guess is that they are, in the extent that they're reaching out to any minority voters, but they're probably playing a numbers game. And if they're playing a numbers game, then I think that they're probably making more of an effort with the Latinx community or the Latino community. I don't know that the GOP uses a language of Latinx, right? So I think they're reaching out to the Latino population, especially around issues that will coincide with the evangelical right over abortion, for example, or over school prayer.
I'm just astonished by the sort of the seeming immunity of a lot of people who've already decided that they're avid Trump supporters to the kind of blatant racism that the Trump administration has used toward, especially toward Chinese, but of course collaterally toward all people who look like they might be Chinese, all East Asians. They are willfully ignorant of the fact that there have been substantial, demonstrable upticks in violence directed against in hate speech and in actual physical hate crimes against people of East Asian ethnicity in this country. We saw in a session that we did that included the other 2 subjects of this film when this question came up, they were they defended the Trump administration's use of Kung flu, of China virus, of things like that. In fact, they doubled down. They said, well, the virus did come from China. It is China's fault. China should pay. I mean, it's insane. I don't know what can be done. Anecdotally, I hear about the occasional person who voted for Trump in 2016, an Asian American person who, because of the undeniable level of racism that they've shown toward East Asians, not just in the period since COVID, but even really beginning with the trade war, that they have seen a lot. They've come around and they've realized that he is every bit the bigot that we've always said that he is. So unfortunately, those are a drop in the bucket compared to the people I still see on WeChat groups who will vociferously defend Trump in spite of all of this. It's just astonishing to me.
So
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think in that way, like, in the panel discussion we did like last week, Sue flat out said, these Asian Americans who talk about racism, they don't know what they're talking about. Asian Americans don't experience racism in this country. So, even in the face of what it seems obvious violence happening against Asian Americans because of COVID-19 and the racism coming out of this administration. I mean, the other thing that Sue said was that racism really doesn't exist in this nation, and that the United States was built by European Americans for European Americans. And so where can you start, how can you even have a conversation with someone who's working off of that principle?
Right. Exactly.
So a question for all three of you. Have you learned anything new about your Asian American identity from participating or producing this documentary? Do you have common concerns, or have you also learned more about the perspectives of others?
I think
you wanna?
you should field that one.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I came here as an immigrant, and so while I was making the film, I was really also exploring my own identity as I was becoming an American, and I was, when I was filming with Jennifer, I went to her classes, Asian Americans in the South, and also her critical race theory class. So I got free education on the Asian American identity, which was so great. Yeah, I mean, it really helped me form my own identity as an Asian American and as an American, which is actually quite different from when I first came here as an immigrant. Yeah, so it's also really great in that sense, and yeah, and also I think through the film, one thing I didn't really expect to come out of the film is actually the power and also the diversity of Asian American vote, and also Asian American identity can be very different. For example, for Lance and Sue versus Kaiser and Jennifer.
You, Kaiser or Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned, if anything, that I guess when I started looking at this question in 2016, I didn't realize how much of partisanship is actually really determined by personality as formed in the China that they left before coming here. And look, we use these words, although they're interchangeable, Asian American and Chinese American, but I think this film really, except in the case of Jennifer, who does work on Asian Americans, it really does focus very much on sort of a specifically Chinese American experience. In that sense, I don't think that it's really representative. So I tend to think that it has it's quite specific in the set of issues that it addresses, and they are very particular to the Chinese American experience, and that's why I'm bringing up China once again. But that's what it really came down to for me, as I realized that I could probably look at any person that I know in China who's on sort of, if I would go back in time, about to emigrate to the United States and predict their partisanship on landing without having talked to them about American politics at all.
That's a bold statement.
I mean, it's really true. I mean, it's all about personality. I mean, the personality characteristics. I mean, the people who are selfish and egoistic and petty and narrow-minded and intolerant and greedy and anti-intellectual and who lack any kind of civic mindedness, who lack basic empathy, they are 100% going to be freaking GOP supporters. The people who possess basic compassion and decency, who have empathy, who are tolerant and open-minded, who are curious, who don't have a quick disgust reflex, who have, who exhibit high levels of trust, they are 100% going to be Democrats. It comes down to that.
Okay, my last question would be, E, what would you like the audience to take away from this film? And who do you hope that audience is, I guess?
Yeah, so I really hope that the film will empower and inspire more voters to be civically engaged and make their voice heard at the ballot box. We're less than a week until election, and it's more important than ever to vote. And I also hope that the film shows the power and diversity of Asian American voters, that Asian Americans are the fastest growing segment of eligible voters in the United States, and more than 11 million will be able to vote this year. And they are the swing vote in key swing districts. And I just looked up the state sheet from APIA Vote, and there are 5.7% of Minnesota's eligible voters, 5.7% of eligible voters in Minnesota are actually AAPIs. So they are margin of victory here in the state of Minnesota. So yeah, and I just got my absentee ballot today, so I'm going to drop off my ballot. I requested in September and I just got it, but I'm so happy I got it. And I'm gonna drop off my vote after this.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's take some questions from our audience. If you have some questions for our panelists, please, again, put them into the Q&A, and we will try to answer as many as we can tonight. Let's see. The whole panel, we've seen political view divided society nationwide. What do you think that causes Asian and Chinese American communities to be so divided when we share so many common identities and struggles? I think we've addressed that pretty well, but.
Jen?
Yeah, no, I think we have addressed that. I'm not sure if there's more to add.
Yeah.
Okay. In what has been the response of Chinese American Republicans to China virus demonizing the Asian Americans by current president and GOP? And then they referred specifically to our Minnesota GOP chairwoman, Jennifer Carnahan. Mm-hmm. And I think the battle within the states on what is COVID, where did it come from, what message each state sort of the GOP kind of presses and pushes kind of depends on how close I think they are to Trump. But I also think there are messages coming out of our Asian American citizens here in Minnesota that are really demonizing other Asian Americans for the virus.
I think, yeah, we talked quite a bit about that already. I mean, I had talked about how anecdotally I've seen some people who've shifted in response to that kind of demonization, but that for the most part, people have really, bent over to make excuses for what Trump has done, or have just flat out denied the existence of racism. So yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add to that. It's to me one of the most depressing and disappointing things and truly shameful things that I've seen coming out of the GOP, of Chinese Americans especially who support the GOP.
Jennifer, are you seeing a big difference between North Carolina and Colorado?
Yes. So to go back to the previous question in terms of, I think it seems like cognitive dissonance for people to know that there are Chinese American voters who are supporting Trump, despite his obvious anti-Asian racism and really specific anti-China rhetoric and racism, right? But I think that, again, the thing to understand is that Asian Americans, like other racial groups, like other, just US voters, really run the gamut of political opinions. And, I think one thing that we should really ask ourselves, and I think Kaiser alluded to this, is how can it be that we're all living in the same reality, right? So how can it be that the US government kidnapped children from Latin America, held them in cages for years, such that 545 children, they can't locate the parents, right? They can't locate their families. And really, that issue alone should be a reason why people are voting the current occupant of the White House out. And yet it's not. Somehow we're able to, there is a segment of this population that's perfectly okay with the fact that there were children held in cages and they can't be reunited with their families, and that the US government has essentially kidnapped and orphaned over 500 children. And so, of course, you can have Chinese Americans who are supporting Trump who have no problem with the fact that there's, that the president says Chinese virus. And of course, you can have people who are willing to ignore this kind of human rights abuse. And, the thing that I like to say when I give webinars about racism and anti-racism is that it's not an identity category. So in other words, I'm not an anti-racist because I'm not white. I practice anti-racism because I choose to, and it's a choice available for all of us. So that also means that I can say and do racist things. And so that also means that Chinese Americans can be racist against other Chinese, right? Against other Chinese Americans, against other Asians. And certainly there is anti-Black racism in the Asian American community and within specific ethnic communities. That is a very difficult thing to address, but that really needs to be addressed.
What are some of the perspectives the panelists and Yi Chen have seen within the Asian communities towards Black Lives Matter movement? Is there empathy? What kinds of perspectives are you seeing?
Yeah. So again, I mean, it's a real mixed bag. I've seen a lot of allyship and a lot of solidarity, a lot of young, especially younger Chinese people, a lot of university students, people in their 20s. And then again, with a group of people who are older, who are in their 50s and 60s, who have been here for a while and who, came to the United States maybe in the 90s or even in the 1980s, who are very much supporting BLM, who really understand and are in perfect solidarity with the struggle for racial justice in the United States, who have probably been on the receiving end of racism and who have seen the genuinely terrifying growth in white supremacist groups in the United States during the Trump administration, and know that it's their place to speak out. On the other hand, I've also seen a lot of people who are repeating Republican talking points, talking about Antifa, talking about the importance of maintaining law and order, who are dismissive of these thugs. There's a lot of, look, let's be really, really frank here. There's a lot of casual racism that equates Blackness with criminality among certain Chinese Americans, and more often than not, that really is, it coincides with their partisanship. And it's very, very unfortunate to see. And I think if there's one point where that really needs to be attacked, that's it. I mean, sometimes it manifests itself in sort of the milder form of opposition to affirmative action programs, but often it takes on really, really serious forms. I asked Yi during the making of this film whether, often during her interviews with the other subjects of the film, with the Republicans, whether, honestly, they had asked her to turn the camera off and then spouted some truly awful, bigoted things. And I mean, I think she'll confess that, yes, they often did that. I would have allowed her to follow me into the bathroom with her camera. There's nothing I would have been afraid to say. I would have been perfectly willing to speak my mind on all of this stuff. But they know deep down that their beliefs are animated in very large part by this unacceptable level of racism.
So what are the sort of the polarization of the country and the polarization of these parties has sort of really caused people to draw lines? And are you hearing that some people have regretted their decision to come to the US, are considering leaving the US if the party that they have certainly supported does not take the prize on November 3rd. Is that a common sentiment in the Chinese community?
So yeah, there's an unsung character in the film, my wife, Fan Fan, who definitely feels that way. I mean, she feels such profound disappointment with what she's found in this country. Even here in the liberal community that I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, I can see it. I can see how people now, especially since the advent of COVID-19, they treat us differently. Just walking around, there is just, this the kind of reflexive civility and niceness that we really liked in our first years in the American South here. A lot of that's vanished. I mean, there's kind of a testiness and a kind of pronounced unfriendliness, and it goes beyond that. I think it's that just the sheer incompetence that she's had to see in the way that this administration has handled COVID-19. And, these are intractable problems. This doesn't all vanish after inshallah, the electoral defeat that we hand to Trump on November 3rd. This does not go away. And I do not blame her. I think that she feels like this is a failed state. It just doesn't recognize it yet. And so she wants to go back to China. I mean, there's just no question. She's just going to tough it out. I mean, she wants us to finish educating our children in the United States and then getting them off to college, because she still recognizes that will still open more doors. And frankly, we've kind of foreclosed the possibility of them going to college in the United States, in China now, because they're not on the path to take the college entry exam in China. It's just no longer possible. So we're sort of stuck with our decision to come here, and she's going to, tough it out. But once they've flown the nest, I think that, she's made no bones about it. I mean, she's planning on going back to China, and I have really no choice but to go with her.
Other thoughts, Yi? Have you had other people come to you and tell you how disillusioned they might be with this process because of the polarization, or thinking about leaving?
I definitely have. I definitely have heard people saying that. I haven't heard specifically from Asian Americans though, or from Chinese Americans. But so yeah, Kaiser's wife Fan Fan is probably the only person that, and she said in the film as well.
Yeah.
Or did you want to comment?
I really want to emphasize what Kaiser said earlier about that the film is really focused on Chinese, really recent Chinese Americans, right? Recently naturalized Chinese Americans, Chinese immigrants. And that isn't an identity that I hold. I speak neither Mandarin nor Cantonese, so I don't have WeChat. And my primary identification is Asian American. So in other words, when pressed, I will explain that I'm Chinese American, but I very firmly identify as an Asian American because I identify very firmly with social justice, and what being Asian American to me means is that it is a term that was born out of social justice movements. And so I guess I would say I'm not in touch with a Chinese immigrant community here in the way that I think Kaiser and Yi are. And therefore I don't know, right, is maybe the best answer I can give. I do know anecdotally from an academic point of view, and I think there are lots of people who can chime in this way, that there are graduate students abroad who are reconsidering applying here for PhDs. So anecdotally, I've heard this from other colleagues, that the political situation in the United States is such that it is making people reconsider whether they want to apply to do their PhDs here. And I do know from colleagues in Canada that they're seeing an uptick in the number of applications that they're getting, particularly from graduate students in Asian countries to come and study in Canada.
Yeah, there's a lot of deterrence right now in terms of visa changes to regulations and such too, in addition to the political climate. It's been very challenging. Do you think that the idea of the Asian Americans as a model minority is still helpful in explaining some aspects of Asian American neoconservatism, or are there new developments or motivations that we should be aware of?
So I think that it's a really it's it's such a toxic idea, this model minority. But the fact is that a lot of people who do, tend to vote Republican in this country cling to it tenaciously and they embrace it. I mean, as problematic of an idea as it is, this is all Jen's territory. This is the stuff that she knows exactly how to talk about. But
Well,
I think it's a pernicious idea.
so I started laughing when I read the question, because the person asking the question is actually somebody that I think is an expert in this field, which is Dr. Josephine Lee. So I'll put in the chat a link to a video that I did, kind of a public service announcement video, along with Frank Wu, addressing the model minority myth. But so yes, I mean, I think the short answer to Joe's question is yes, right? That there certainly are Asian Americans, and maybe more specifically, we can talk about Lance and Sue, that really do believe in the model minority myth, right? That really do believe in the in that myth of exceptionalism, right? And I would hazard to guess that Chinese immigrants, especially, probably have an additional sense of Chinese superiority, right, over other Asian ethnic groups, right? So in other words, something that, again, I've heard anecdotally from more recent Chinese immigrants is that, that Chinese people are certainly superior to Filipino people, right? And that Chinese, and that Chinese culture is so much better than Vietnamese culture, for example. So
I don't know if you've seen Ali Wong, the comedian, but she has this routine that's just, she talks about how there's proper Asians and then there's jungle Asians. She herself is half Chinese and half Vietnamese. And so, I mean, it's done, humorously, but she really puts her finger on something. I think what Jen is talking about, this kind of intra-Asian racism, it's certainly real. How Japanese, Koreans, and Chinese often look down their nose at the dusky, swarthy Southeast Asians with their, it's shameful. Absolutely.
yeah. And so, I think that it's easy then to play into this kind of model minority myth, like Asians are the best minorities of all, right? We're not, and then I think that, certainly like in the Amy Chua Tiger Mother vein, right? Chinese are the best Asians of all the Asians. So, yeah, to that extent, I think if you're already inclined to a certain kind of conservatism and American bootstraps mentality, then absolutely the model minority myth is something that you're gonna, grab onto with both hands. I mean, really the popularity of Amy Chua's Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother is like proof positive of that, right? And the fact that it was such a bestseller, and that Asian Americans
we can have problems with Amy Chua for other things, but that book is often really, really misunderstood. It's actually against the idea that I mean, I don't know if you've actually read it, but
no, I read it. So I had to read it, unfortunately.
Right. It's not as portrayed, right? It's not pro tiger mothering.
Really? I thought it was pro tiger.
No. It's absolutely not. It's anti tiger mothering. It in the end, it says, basically how she feels like she failed for those reasons, and if she were to do it again, that's not how she would do it.
I mean, I'll tell you what that book really is about. That book is a study in narcissism. So the only way that book should ever be taught is in an intro to psych class if you want to know what a narcissist looks like.
Okay. I mean, I know Amy personally, and I don't think she's the cardboard cutout villain that she's often portrayed to be.
We'll have to have another long conversation.
We will. Anyway, there's a question I've been looking at here from Jean Lee. Can I?
Yes, go right ahead.
She talks about anti-communism that turns Cubans and recent immigrants from China toward the GOP, and the feelings against communism is enough to overcome the obvious objections to Trump. Perhaps, she suggests, we cannot appreciate how bad it is under communism that it will suspend common sense. I understand that question, but I think that unless you are a persecuted follower of a new religious movement like Falun Gong, unless you are an ethnic minority from a group like the Uyghurs or the Tibetans, unless you are somebody who is like a prominent activist member of an underground church or an active political dissident, there is no sort of oppressive communism that is. I think that's almost wholly invented in the case of a lot of these people who come here. It's 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 false. It's a put on. My in the case of the overwhelming majority of the immigrants who come here and end up supporting Trump, that's exactly what they are not. They are from a privileged class, from wealthy families of means who have benefited immensely from the reform and opening period in China, and who have not known a moment of anything that they could faithfully describe as political repression in China. So I honestly don't think that that's the case at all.
Thank you. I had read a statistic, so I'm just going to throw my own question here for a minute, that 22% of Chinese Americans are undecided. What do you think is the key issue that will drive their decision as they walk into the polling place?
Yi, do you want to take a stab?
I would actually refer to the AAPI data, the 2020 Asian American Voter Survey. They did survey on issues that are important to Asian American voters. So I'm actually going to type that link in the chat.
Thank you.
And I just want to go back to the previous question about communism and anti-socialism. I shared a link to an interview with MIT professor Yasheng Huang. Actually, Kaiser introduced me to him. Kaiser did a podcast with him. In the podcast, they talked about the Trump's appeal to voters from authoritarian countries. So interesting enough, what a lot of times that's not talked about is China is actually an authoritarian country. So when we talk about socialism or communism, I think it's very different what that means in the United States, which is a democracy, versus China as an authoritarian state. So I want to share that because I thought Yasheng had really good insights in that interview.
Yasheng is brilliant. He's going to be on a panel that we're going to be holding for SupChina on November 11th that I encourage you all to check out. He'll be one of a number of really prominent China watchers who will be talking about the future of U.S.-China relations in the next 4 years. Can I take a stab at another question that's up here on the Q&A?
Mm-hmm.
Hetty Tripp asks, Kaiser, do you feel that your son is becoming too American? In other words, has he assimilated out of being Chinese or Asian American? That's a great question. It's something that my wife and I wrestle with constantly because she really does. She has like terrible anxiety about him she feels like she's lost her son. His Mandarin is getting worse and worse. She can barely communicate with him. He just stays in his room and plays video games. And he basically morphed into an American the moment he stepped off the plane. I am less worried about that. I mean, I feel like this is something I've seen before. And in my own case, I think I probably went through it earlier in my life than maybe he's going through right now. It's recoverable and it's there. And I think that if we imbue him with values and rather than trying to ram Chineseness down his throat or insist on its, the urgency of retaining it, I think if we model a kind of a Chineseness that he will find admirable, just as my parents did, he will come back to it of his own, and the fundaments of the language, the culture, the values, that's all still there. I'm not too worried.
Thank you. So another recent question, many recent Chinese immigrants came to America without a strong religious belief. How does that affect their formation of their political view if they're not aligned with the evangelicals or any sort of Christian or other religious background?
Well, I mean, the churches are pretty predatory here. I mean, they know they will be there outside swearing in ceremonies. They're there. They know where immigrants will go and where they'll congregate. They know that these people are cut off from their own social networks and are vulnerable, are looking for quick ways to assimilate often into society. So they're quite predatory in that way, in sort of, and I know that, I mean, when we arrived, immediately we were bombarded with this, my wife, aha, a vulnerable, Chinese person, let's get her into our church and get her, splashed with water and worshiping Jesus. And fortunately, she's resistant to that. But I think it's really, deeply unethical. I mean, you're really kind of preying on a vulnerable community, and ramming, a system of thought that's wholly alien down the throats of these people. And yeah, I mean, often it's with political motivations in mind. I personally find it disgusting.
Other thoughts, Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there's members of the GOP, and so this would include recent immigrants and Asian Americans that are not religiously based, or not Christian based. There are Jewish people who support Donald Trump. I'm sure that there are Muslim people who support Donald Trump. There are gay people who support Donald Trump. So, I think there's a lot of reasons that people who are choosing to support someone like Donald Trump would support him beyond religious beliefs.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
There's another question about advice for having conversations with friends and families about these political issues, and perhaps with people on the other side.
I really don't have any advice. I mean, I had, one of the things I had hoped to do with the event that my center held was to show that people from different sides of the political aisle could have civil disagreement. Mm-hmm. And if you watch that, you will see that there was no sense that there was any sort of real dialogue going on. And of course, I know that I can be accused of being biased, and that's totally fine. But and I'll just repeat this, when Sue comes out and says that there's no racism going on against Asian Americans, I don't even know how to start having a conversation with someone if we can't agree on basic facts. And when Sue says that the United States was a country that was built for European Americans by European Americans, again, I don't know how to start having a conversation where we can have a civil disagreement when we can't even find common ground. So I will tell you a principle of REI, which is the Race Equity Institute. I don't know if they're doing online training, but one of the things they say in doing race equity training is that there's enough work to do among like-minded allies, right? Among fellow travelers in terms of race and racism work, that you shouldn't be wasting your time trying to convert someone into a political opinion. So in other words, I totally get if you have members of your family, I think that's really hard, right? But I would also, I know friends who have severed relationships with family members who are voting for Donald Trump because they really feel like they are not, anyone who's going to vote for Donald Trump is not aligned with their basic values. And I think that's, honestly, I think right now that's totally fine. I think the stakes for this election are such that it's not a normal election. This is really, someone who's choosing to vote for Donald Trump is essentially saying that they are okay that the US government kidnap children and put them in cages. And if you're, really if you put it into the individual, like if you're okay with your brother kidnapping a child, locking them in his basement for over a year, and then finally trying to find the parents, and if you're okay with that, then, I don't know what to tell you, right? Like, that's kind of how I feel. Like, that's the equivalent. And that's a line in the sand, right? That is a line that I think we should never cross, is basic humanity.
I think we have to still try to scale the empathy wall. I mean, or I used to really believe that. I think it's important that we not entirely give up, but I totally understand where Jen's coming from with that. I mean, I have a great deal of difficulty believing I can actually share a reality with people who are in such deep denial about things that to me are just so blatantly obvious. I mean, the worldview that they are endorsing, that they subscribe to, is literally a dangerous one. I mean, we're living right now with the consequences of their outright rejection of science. I mean, I'm talking about 80,000 new cases of COVID-19 daily. From the beginning of this pandemic, they have ignored the advice of medical professionals. They have ignored the advice of our public health experts. We're also living with the consequences of their rejection of climate science, which is just, I mean, it's just taking such a toll on humanity. I don't feel like, we have the leisure now to be so patient and to walk them through this. I think that electorally defeating them, in some cases, just cutting them the fuck out of our lives is about the only thing we can do. I mean, the Republican Party, I think, all these problems I've enumerated, but it's, Donald Trump is the distillation of all the evils that this party actually embodies right now. I mean, he's just flaunting all of these things, these objectionable values that I've enumerated. I mean, he's worse than that. He's fully anti-democratic. He's worse than the traditional Republicans because that kind of vindictiveness, the viciousness, the constant attacks on media, calling them the enemies of the people when they are the absolute indispensable pillar of American democracy. I mean, it's genuinely frightening to me. I'm not exaggerating here. I am not one of these people who will casually throw around words like fascist. This is genuinely dangerous.
Thank you. We have come to time. I guess I would like to hear from Yi one more time. I'd love to hear if you're going to be making another vote film or if you have another story that you'd like to follow for the Chinese immigrant and citizen population here in the US. I think this film was really eye-opening, and it was an excellent discussion and perspective on Asian American voting. So thank you so much for making it. What's your next step?
Well, I do have a couple ideas in development, but they're in very early stages. So right now I'm really focused on distribution of the film, which is actually a full-time job. So it's been really great. We've done more than 20 of community and university screenings and events like this one as part of our impact campaign. So next week is the election. So our focus right now is really to get out the votes, and after that we really want to get the film into more classrooms, and we're developing more educational resources, including discussion guides for teachers. Right now, if you go to our website, we have a resource page that already has resources, including extra short video clips, footage that's not in the film for teachers to use in the classroom. We're in the process of developing a discussion guide. So would definitely love for audience to watch the film. It's streaming until November 19th on America Reframed, World Channel America Reframed website. And it just opened up in AFI Silver Theater in Maryland, virtual cinema. It's available nationwide. So if you want to support a local wonderful nonprofit theater, and if your organization or your school wants to host a screening or an event, you can find the information on our website, firstvotefilm.com. And please do follow us on First Vote Film on social media. And if you have seen the film, please tell your family and friends about it. We would love to have more people watch the film, and would love to work with more educators to bring the film into classrooms.
Thank you. That's a great note to stop on, and I appreciate everyone's time today. And we will adjourn here. But thank you so much for the discussion. It was fascinating, and I do agree. Everyone should watch this film. It's truly remarkable. Thank you, E. Thank you, Kaiser, and thank you, Jennifer. That was really a great time.